podcast. Live.
Okay, we should be live now. Use this like this. Look at Shamash. Okay. A happy Hanukkah to all the viewers.
Yeah, that was something.
Amen.
Yeah.
You're on. We should be on.
צריך ללחוץ על משהו.
No. You're on. It says live. Did it say live?
No, yes.
No, but it says live already on the front. I can't. If you could wave to us, the guys that are listening in, we would know.
Oh, זה משדר. Stop podcast.
It says live. We're on live. Okay. Sorry for the slight delay. 8th day of Hanukkah here, but we're going to move on. Concentrate not on the topic of Hanukkah, but rather on the topic of the Parsha. The topic being the showdown between Yehuda and his brothers versus Yosef, who they don't know is Yosef, when they come to the country of Egypt, and they wish to get back their brother Shimon. Yosef has asked for them to bring his youngest brother Binyamin with them, and as we will soon see, or as we won't see, but because we read about it last week, Yaakov was very, very hesitant, actually was adamantly opposed to bringing Binyamin, sending Binyamin down to Egypt. As he said, it's a dangerous way, and I suspect, says Yaakov, that some fatal accident may take place. Because although God runs his world, Hashem also wants us to act in a responsible way, and when there's a dangerous path, then that in itself allows the Satan, allows the negative angel to have more control, more power, because one shouldn't put oneself in a precarious situation. So Yaakov really didn't want to send Binyamin, but then Yehuda insisted that there's no way they could go back and buy more food in Egypt if they didn't take the youngest son with them, Binyamin, and so they indeed took Binyamin. And Yosef had instigated a plot that he then put his own goblet, his own special cup that he drank from, was placed into the bundle, into the suitcase of Binyamin. And here goes the narrative, here goes the story. They had just left the city and not gone far. Yosef said to his steward or to his assistant, "Up, go after the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, why did you repay good with evil?" It is the very one, this cup is the very one from which my master drinks and which he uses for his divination. It was a wicked thing for you to do. He overtook them and spoke those words to them. And they said to him, "Why do you say such a thing? Far be it from your servants to do anything of the kind. Here we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money that we found in the mouth of our bags." Because last week we were told that they all found, when they got home, they had all found that their money that they had paid for the food that they were carrying home with them was returned at the top of the sack, which was extremely, extremely mysterious to them. So he said, "But we did bring back that money and we brought new money to buy grain. So you see that we're honest people. We're honest people to the extent that it's ridiculous that you would expect that we have stolen any silver or gold from your master's house." And they proposed as follows. They said, "Whichever of your servants it is found with shall die. The rest of us, moreover, shall become slaves to my Lord." He proposed, in other words, the assistant of Yosef replied, "Although what you are proposing is right, but I'm going to change the terms. Only the one with whom it is found shall be my slave, the rest of you shall go free." So each one hastened to lower his bag to the ground, and each one opened his bag. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the goblet turned up in Binyamin's bag. At this, they tore their clothes, each reloaded his pack animal, and they returned to the city. So, again, Yosef repeats, he's very angry at this, but he says, "I'm not going to punish all of you, I'm not going to kill anybody, only the one in whose possession the goblet was found shall be my slave. The rest of you go back in peace to your father." So now comes the showdown with which this week's parsha begins. The words that begin is Vayigash, and that's why the whole portion is called Vayigash. Vayigash, Elav Yehuda, Yehuda went up to him and said, "Please, my Lord," speaking to Yosef, "let your servant appeal to my Lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh." And we are told that this word Vayigash, that he drew himself near to Yosef, contains within itself three meanings, all concurrent. Vayigash means that he prayed to Hashem that he be successful in freeing Binyamin. Vayigash means he prepared gifts, he was prepared to pay any amount of money. Sometimes money talks. Vayigash also means he was prepared to do battle. And one of the Midrashim says he stamped his foot, and the strength of Yehuda made the whole city tremble. So Yehuda was ferocious, you could say. He was determined. The look in his eyes told Yosef that there was no negotiation possible here. Because Binyamin, why was it that way? Why was Yehuda so determined to bring back Binyamin? And the answer is because, as the pasuk continues, Yehuda himself explains in his own words, "Now if I come to your servant my father, if I come back to my father Yaakov, and the boy is not with us, Benjamin is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servant," in other words, "I will have sent the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. I will have caused him a devastation that he will not be able to continue living. Now your servant," Yehuda talking about himself, "I have pledged for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers." And of course he added, as the Medrash relates, that I'm stronger. If you want somebody good for war, if you want somebody good for work, I'm the strong one. Binyamin is younger, he's not as strong. 4, how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father. And he continues, he says, for your servant, and if you're looking, you want to find it in the Chumash, it's chapter 44, verse 32. For your servant, Yehuda speaking about himself in third person, for your servant assumed responsibility for the boy from my father, saying, if I do not bring him to you, I will have sinned against my father forever. And now let's recount a chapter back what it was that Yehuda had actually told his father. Yehuda had said to his father Yisrael, his father Yaakov, send the lad with me, and we will get up and go, and we will live and not die, both we and you and also our young children. I will guarantee him. Take note of these words. This is very important words. Anochi e'ervenu in the Hebrew. I will guarantee him. From my hand you can demand him. If I do not bring him to you and stand him up before you, I will have sinned against you forever. And this will explain to Yosef what Yosef really is, of course, asking. But it's within the line. It's not there in the text of the Chumash. But the Medrash points out that Yosef had said to Yehuda, why of all your brothers have you become the spokesman? I can see from my goblet, my magical powers, so to speak, that there are amongst you brothers, there are some who are older than you. And nevertheless, you are speaking up. Why are you taking the limelight here? Why are you taking the brunt of the responsibility? He replied, everything that you see is on account of the responsibility I assume for you. I told my father I am responsible. Ani anochi e'ervenu. I will be the guarantor. I will be responsible. And as we know, we are told by our sages, he took responsibility in both worlds. He says, in this world I will be excommunicated if I don't bring him back to you, God forbid. And in the next world as well, I will forfeit my share in the next world. Yehuda had put his entire life on the line, physical life and spiritual life. And therefore, I guess, maybe this is my own words, there's nothing as dangerous as an enemy who has nothing to lose. When you're up against an adversary who has nothing to lose, that becomes the most dangerous adversary to face. Because there's no reason for them to fear or to back down. Yehuda basically committed his life, physical and spiritual, to his father that he would bring back Binyamin. And this is what he told Yosef. Well, you all know that this story ended up, of course, with a very happy ending. Yosef took this as a sign that the brothers had fully repented and had totally overcome that fallacy that had allowed them to do such a tragic thing as selling their brother to slavery. The fact that they were now prepared to give up their lives in defense of a brother was proof that they had matured, they had rectified, they had done proper teshuvah, they had returned to God, and they were now different in their behavior. And now Yosef, who had wanted to he had orchestrated all this, not to punish them, but to bring forth in an open and revealed way the fact that they had returned and changed their ways. Now that this was done, Yosef reveals himself to his brother in this week's parsha, and he says, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. In the dramatic, very dramatic moment, Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? And they all wept, cried, emotional reunion. And that's what we read about in this week's parsha, and then in the next week's parsha, and we also read, in this week's also as well, parsha, we read the beautiful words, Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Avihem. The spirit of their father Yaakov was enlivened. He had gone through terrible times, but now he had seen how Hashem had been taking them on a trip. It's a roller coaster trip with a great high. And Yaakov's spirit was brought back to life. But that is the story of the parsha. What we would like to zero in here on is the concept of being a guarantor. Because there is also that concept, you will know, in modern day life, in commerce. There's a joke, you may have heard it from me before, a guy goes to the bank and says, I need a loan of $1 million. The bank manager says, you? I know you too well. He says, I don't understand. The last bank I went to said, you? I don't know you from Adam. So I'm not sure, when do they give loans? If they know you or they don't know you? But one thing we do know, that to take a loan, you need something to guarantee. A guarantee can be something, an asset that you have, or a guarantor. Particularly when you take loans, perhaps not from banks or from other sources, from other people, the lender would like to know who's going to be your guarantor. If you can't pay, who can I come to? So we're going to see that this is a halachic concept. We're going to a Mishnah now in the tractate of Baba Batra, chapter 10, Mishnah 7. And the halacha reads as follows. The Mishnah reads as follows. One who loaned money to his fellow on a guarantor security may not exact payment from the guarantor. In other words, Reuven said, I need to borrow money from you, Mr. Shimon. And Shimon said, I'd love to lend you money, but I'm just not sure about your financial situation. Can you bring me a guarantor? And Shimon says, yes. Reuven says, yes, sure, I can give you a guarantor. My friend Levi will be my guarantor. And Levi says, yes, I'm agreed to be the guarantor. Says the Mishnah that one needs to first go to Reuven, who lent the money, and ask him whether he can pay back before you can go to the guarantor to ask for payment. But if he had said, on the condition that I may exact payment from who I wish, the guy lending the money says, look, Reuven, I know you, very nice, but I know you too well. Do me a favor, I need a guarantor, that I don't have to chase you, I can go straight to the guarantor if I wish. Then the halacha is, he may exact payment from the guarantor. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says another stipulation. If the borrower had property, whether he made a condition or not, he may not exact payment from the guarantor. In other words, there's always a fallback in the property, so the guarantor, when he steps into guarantee, assumes that it'll be paid back from the property, so he doesn't guarantee to be the first option of reclaiming the money. Comes the Rashbam and he explains like this. He may not exact payment from the guarantor. What does that mean? At first, he can't take payment from the guarantor. Only if he first demands payment from the borrower, who's then found to be a debtor in the court of law, you find out he doesn't have money. Then if the borrower cannot pay, the lender can exact payment from the guarantor. So first you got to take the guy who borrowed the money to court. When the court establishes, yes, he has to pay, and they also establish that he doesn't have what to pay with, go back to the guarantor. As the Talmud later explains this Mishnah. Now the Gemara has a discussion. The Gemara says, Rabbi Huna said, from where is the law derived that a guarantor becomes financially obligated? Where do we know such a concept? How do we know that a person can, well, you say it's obvious, I can take responsibility for somebody else. But no, it's not obvious. We need a basis. What is the basis of this concept? Basis is, Rav Huna says, it's written that Yehuda said, I will guarantee him. From my hand, you can demand him. In other words, Yehuda said, I'm going to guarantee that I bring back Binyamin. You can demand him from me. Okay, so the question is though, how does that's not exactly the same case as when there's a person who lent money, and then there's another person who stands in and takes responsibility that the money will be paid. Here you have Yehuda, who has taken Binyamin, he says, I guarantee that Binyamin will be paid back. Slightly different. And also, as the Netziv asks, brought by the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos, another question is, what evidence can be brought from the assumed obligation to protect and return something currently inexistent to the assumed obligation for a loan that is no longer extant? The loan is no longer tangible. In other words, I've taken Binyamin. Yehuda has taken Binyamin from his father. He's taken him physically from his father, says, I'm responsible to bring him back. So, perhaps that's more understandable. There's this young man here, and the responsibility on me to bring him back. With money, it's money, when we give a loan, we assume the money will be spent. The money that's paid back, the loan that's paid back is not the same money. When you lend somebody based on iPhone, he has to give you back the same iPhone. When you lend someone $100, he doesn't have to give you back the same $100. On the contrary, you expect that the reason he borrowed $100 is to spend it, and he'll give you back the value, another $100. Here, we're talking about a loan. So in a loan situation, it's an intangible kind of obligation. How do we know that a person can undertake that? Where do we see that in the case of Yehuda? So let's understand. I'll just open up here for a moment the actual sikha, the actual talk of the Rebbe, in volume number 30 of the Rebbe's talks, a portion of Vayigash, first sikha. That we really would like to understand. Really, what we need to understand is that here we're talking about a deeper kind of commitment. We're talking about a difference. It's not a monetary commitment. How do we jump from one to the other? Going from the commitment of Yehuda to bring back Binyamin and jumping to the fact that a person who commits to pay the obligations of somebody else that obligation will fall upon him. So let's look at what the Rebbe proposes. There's two ways of looking at guarantors. One way of looking at is that the liability applies only to the debt. In other words, there's this loan of $10,000 that went from Reuven to Shimon. Levi has now placed upon himself a financial obligation to pay that debt if it comes due. And okay, let's understand that a person is allowed to take upon himself financial obligations. That is, when a person gives his word, when a person gives his commitment in a financial way. We know from transactions, we know from many places in the Torah, that's something that's binding. If it's obvious and it's clear that you meant it, and you really meant to undertake it, you weren't just saying it to be nice, but you meant it, then you can obligate yourself financially to pay somebody else's debt. And then there's another way of looking at this concept of guarantorship, and that is that I take responsibility to be in the place of the borrower. In other words, I don't just relate to the financial transaction. I actually become a replacement, so to speak, of the actual person who has the financial obligation. It sounds like a play on words, but it's not, because the question is, where does that arvut, where does that guarantorship, where does it start to take hold? Where does it start to? How deep does it go? Is it just on the monetary obligation, or do I actually stand in the place of the borrower and I'm saying, I now am instead of that person? Any obligations he has automatically fall on me. The fact that usually the halacha is that you have to first go to the borrower, that's perhaps got to do with the fact that the guarantor expects that. Look, the guy borrowed the money, he should have the first responsibility to pay. But if he doesn't, really, I've undertaken to be in his place. How does that work? This is what we'd like to know. How does that work? So what we're going to discuss here is that the way it works is first evident between Yehuda and Binyamin. And that's why, although the scenario is a bit different, but the underlying concept that somebody can consider himself to be in place of somebody else is to be seen in this relationship between Yehuda and Binyamin. So let's understand, what is the concept of guaranteeing? Where does it really come from? So we'll go to a famous saying of the Gemara, which says, Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. And I say that in Hebrew because it's a good, important cliche, it's an important rule of the Torah to know. Kol Yisrael, all Jews, arevim, are guarantors, ze bazeh, one for each other. What does that mean in a practical way? It means, you may have come once to a Friday night dinner, and you will have seen that somebody makes kiddush on a cup of wine, and then everybody else says Amen, and they drink from it. The question is, What's going on over here? Really, everybody has to make Kiddush. And the answer is that, well, first of all, there's a concept called Shomea Ke'oneh. If you say Amen, if you listen to something and you say, yes, Amen means confirmed, I agree, and it's really as if you said it. And then let's go one scenario further. What happens if a person, he was in his face, somebody came late. The father made Kiddush and then one of his family members came late. And they don't know how to make their own Kiddush. The father can once again say Kiddush. Well, how can he say Kiddush? He's not obligated. He's already said the sanctification, the Kiddush, which he has an obligation to do on Shabbat. How can he say it again? Is it not a blessing in vain? So the halacha is in Shulchan Aruch, one who has already discharged his mitzvah obligation is no longer obligated to fulfill that mitzvah. If I made Kiddush on Friday, I don't have to do it again. However, if another person is not familiar with the mitzvah, for example, he cannot make Kiddush himself. The former person, even though let's say me, I already fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush personally, I may recite the blessing on behalf of the newcomer. The reason for this is because all Jews are responsible for one another. In other words, so long, let's say it in the words of the Shulchan Aruch. For example, he can sanctify the Shabbos day with Kiddush for someone else, even though he's already done it himself. Because for a mitzvah incumbent upon all Israel, each person is the other's guarantor. Therefore, he is considered obligated in this matter as long as his fellow has not fulfilled his own obligation. Do you understand what we're saying? We're saying that when Mr. B has not yet fulfilled his obligation, it's as if I still have an obligation as well. My own obligation I fulfilled. But my obligation in terms of me and him being responsible for each other, I haven't fulfilled. So because of my responsibility for him, I can now go and recite the blessing and say God's name, usually which I wouldn't be able to do, just for nothing would be a sin. Here I'm invited to go and say the blessing again, because this newcomer, has not yet heard the Kiddush, and they have an obligation. If he has an obligation, that means it's my obligation to make sure that his obligation is also fulfilled, as if I have an obligation. Very, very beautiful concept, arvut, guarantorship, responsibility. So now let's see the way the Alter Rebbe explains this concept. Let's first go to a medrash. Let's just go to a very, very simple medrash. The medrash says, Rabbi Shimon, you may have heard this parable before. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught. There's a parable of two people who were sitting on a ship. One of them took a drill and began to drill beneath him. His friend said to him, "What are you sitting and doing?" He said to them, "Why are you concerned? Am I not drilling beneath my own place? I paid for my seat." We have in our own recent history, I think they call him the underwear bomber, the guy who tried to detonate a bomb in his seat in the plane. And for that, I think till today, we have to take off our shoes when we go through security. At any rate, what are you going to say? I bought a seat, I'm allowed to do whatever I want with it. They said to him, because the waters will rise up and flood the boat for all of us. You can't make a hole in your own seat. So now let's understand, the Jewish people are like all considered to be in one boat. More than that. They're all considered to be part of one entity. Yes, we all have our own identities. But on the other hand, we are also all bound up and we all emanate from one place and we're all hinged and dependent and codependent one on each other. And let's understand this from the analogy, it's Hanukkah after all. We have the menorah, all the lights. Yeah, good. We got all the lights burning there. The menorah is considered, particularly the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, which is with 7 branches, is considered to be an analogy for the Jewish people. As we read yesterday in the Haftorah, Hashem tells the prophet that he gave me a vision of a menorah, and that was representative of the Jewish people, the 7 branches of the menorah. Now, there's something very unique about the way the menorah had to be made, and that is as follows. Let's read in the words of the Alter Rebbe who gave this analogy. We ought to explain why the collective of the Jewish people are referred to as a menorah candelabra. What is meant by that? What is so significant about it? Well, simply speaking, there's 7 branches. And that represents the 7 sephirot, the 7 different personality types. And we know that each of the sephirot is made up of the other 10 sephirot, so that would be 7 times 10. 7 times 10 is 70. 70 Jews went down to Egypt with Jacob when they first went down to Egypt before the exile of Egypt. That represents the body of the Jewish community, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. All the rest of us are all splintered off from those original 70. Splinter souls, different fragmented souls, each which constitutes its own complete soul, but just pieces, smaller pieces. But they're all represented by the 7 lights of the menorah. But there's something more than that. Not just the 7 disparate or different personality types are representative here of the people and the different kinds of people and the different modes of serving God, which is the most important part of different personality types, is that each one represents a different way of serving God. Someone with more joy, someone with more strictness, someone with more love, someone with more beauty. They're all various ways and methods of serving Hashem that are, we're talking within the context of fulfilling the 613 mitzvahs, of course, and the proper tenets of halacha and halachic Judaism. Within that, everybody does it a little different with their own personality. But there's something else that the menorah teaches us, and that is, the menorah is, as the verse states, to be made of one beaten piece of gold. So, how would you make a menorah? You would take gold, and you would join pieces together. No, they were instructed to take one block. Moshe had to take one block, and he said it was very difficult to do. So much so, the Medrash says he threw it into the fire and it became. But the intention was to take one block of gold and to beat it. Not to chisel it, to beat it, to bend it and stretch it and form it in a way of a menorah. But it all emanates from one block. Now, what's interesting about when you do something from one block? Typically, when something is beaten, that which is above is sent below, and that which is below is above. You need to flatten it so everyone's going to be repositioned. The gold that was at the top of the cube is going to be possibly repositioned to the bottom, to the sides. So that everything is mixed. Nitarev. Remember, the word for guarantor is arev. Nitarev means to be mixed. Everything is mixed together, high and low, low and high. So it is that all of Israel are guarantors. All of the Jewish people are guarantors for each other. In other words, arevim. In other words, what does it mean, arevim? Me'urav. Some may know that in Israeli restaurants you can order a me'urav. Me'urav means a gemishach. It's a mixed up thing, all kinds of different things mixed in over there, like a stir fry kind of thing. So arev means guarantor. Why are we guarantors one from the other? Because we are mixed up of each other. We're made like the menorah. We're made of one block. We form one block, and some of us are up, some of us are down, some of us are right, some of us are left. Perhaps we could explain it in a way that we'll understand it even more deeply from the persona of man. Because it said of the Jewish people, you are called man, atem kruyim adam. Why the analogy of the Jewish people to man? For just as a man possesses a head and feet, and the head receives life force from the feet, for it relies on them. If you've got a problem with the feet, the head has a problem too. God forbid somebody has a blood clot down there in his legs. It's a problem. So too is the entire Jewish people together called one singular man, one entity. In other words, we need everything to flow, just like in a human body. The head and the feet, they're all reliant on each other. Not just does the feet take the head where the head wants to go, but there's a flow. There's a flow of blood, there's a flow of nerves and of energy and so on. And although they are so disparate, they all form one entity, one man. The truth is, if you look at the limbs in our bodies, they're extremely different one from the other. Extremely different. Diametrically opposed in a way. Yet they all form one human body. In a way, there's two ways of looking at it. There's just, we come from one block, we really all come from one place. Like we like to say, you have to look at what unites us. You have to look at what's similar to us. You have to look at what is identical between all of us. And that will be the thing that will make us feel united. As the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Kulanu, that we're all, in a source level, we're all brothers. And therefore, we have that element that's truthfully just the same about all of us. But then there's another aspect, that is, look, let's not deny the fact that we're very different. People are very different from each other. Jewish people are also very different from each other. So for that, we have to understand that we are actually like the limbs of a body. Limbs of a body are very different from each other. But the famous story goes about it's a medrash, that there's a king who's very ill, and the diagnosis is he's going to need the milk of a lioness. Now, how do you get milk from a lioness? So there's a wise man who said, I can get it, but I need an unlimited supply of lamb and anything else at my disposal. When he starts feeding the lioness a lamb, he sends it from very far away, and another lamb, and he gets closer each time, and he gets closer, till finally the lioness feels comfortable enough with him, and she allows this hunter to milk her. Look, he has the lion's milk, he's going to present it to the king the next day. And he has a dream. And all of the limbs of his body are arguing. Who's the one who takes full credit for this tremendous, amazing feat? The feet says it was me, the stealth in my feet. The tiptoe, they crept so silently. The eyes say, what do you mean? It was my discerning when was the right moment. The hand said, no, it was my gentle touch, and so on and so forth. The mouth said, the tongue said, watch. It's all got to do with me, and you'll soon know it. Next day he goes to the king, and his tongue, instead of saying, Your Majesty, here is the milk of the lioness, the tongue says, here is the milk of the dog. And the king turns red and livid and infuriated and said he's going to be thrown into the dungeon, but I don't want to do it in a fit of rage. Tomorrow you will be taken to death for this total ridicule that you've done. Well, he has another dream that night, and the tongue says, no, what do you say? And everybody agreed, yes, okay. And this tells us the Medrash, Hachayim v'hamavet biyad halashon. Life and death is really in the hands of the tongue. But that just goes to tell us how important the tongue is, how the tongue can kill us, the tongue can bring us back to life. For the next morning, he went and he says, sorry, my almighty the king, I got confused, I had stage shock in front of the king. It's the milk of a lioness, rest be assured, and he drank the milk, and the king's son was saved, and everything was good. But besides for teaching us the importance of the tongue, it also teaches us that in reality, all the limbs were right. Every single limb had to be working in unison, had to be doing exactly what they know how to do, what they do best, in order to be able to come to the result which they needed, and that result being to get the milk of the lioness. So we have an aspect of unity where, because of our differences, that's what makes us one. I don't think we look very much at the garbage collectors. But you should give it thought once in a while that when they go on strike, God forbid, the whole place stinks. The professors can't think because of the stench in the street. What's the professor has to do with the garbage collector? Everybody has to do their work. Yes, the professor may be thinking about quantum physics, and it may be very, very important. But if he doesn't have all the other elements of society, they may not be as intellectual. If the baker doesn't bake, he won't have bread. The baker may think, what do I need the quantum scientist, quantum physics scientist? But you know what? If he wants new inventions and new technology and new ways to make bread and get it to rise better and so on and so forth, he also needs that. Society needs everybody. The Jewish people is made up of disparate, different, very different kinds of people. But all of them form, we say, the Atem Kriyim Adam Yud, the Jewish people are called one man. One man means you are, in other words, you're like one person. So, and then there's something else, and that is that there's the deepest quintessential part, which is called the neshama, the deepest aspect of the neshama, where really the only thing that's relevant is that it's that most deepest quintessential level, everything is equal. Everyone understands they're a critical and important component within the whole, but their differences are not so felt. Rather, what's felt is the depth, the singularity of what they make up altogether. So now let's take this back. Now. That's where the concept of being a guarantor comes from. It's not a concept that just starts with the people that thought it up. It starts, in other words, because it reflects a true reality. I can make Kiddush for somebody, even though I don't have the obligation anymore. I can do it for somebody else because that person and I are really mixed up together. We're bound up together. And therefore we're responsible for each other. I cannot shirk my responsibility to the other person. We're responsible. It's not I'm a nice guy, I'm going to do something for him. No, you're doing something for yourself as well, because his obligation is yours as well. Now let's take this. If this is the case, so what is Binyamin and Yehuda? What are they really saying? Yehuda is saying, I have guaranteed this young man. In other words, this is not something outside of me. I and him is a deeper level of the alav et anar means I am mixed up with this young lad. I and this young person are not two entities that I can choose to not care about him or to care about him. I've placed myself firmly in his place. In other words, I've bound myself up with him. I'm one with him, and therefore, if something happens to him, as they used to say in the streets of Brooklyn, you touch on my kid, I break your face, or something like that. You can't tell, almost like a parent, tell the parent, no, don't worry about what the guy's doing to your kid. Remove yourself, consider yourself distant from it. You can't tell a parent that. A parent and a kid are one. If a parent sees somebody, God forbid, doing something nasty to their kid, then it's as if they're doing it to them. Alav, ki avdecha alav et anar. Where did it go off? Start again? So what are we saying in other words like this? So now let's take this concept of being mixed, of being responsible, to be guarantor. That being a guarantor means it's a reflection of the fact that you really anyway are responsible for the other person. Taking on a guarantorship financially, says the Rebbe like this, it's the same with regarding monetary debt. On account of the principle of arvut, because of this concept that we are all responsible for each other, that all of Israel are guarantors for one another, again because we're mixed up with each other, the borrower's duty of repayment falls on his fellow. The guarantor, as though he had borrowed the money himself and incurred this debt. What this person can now choose to do is to say, I single myself out from all the other Jewish people. I will take responsibility for this person. In other words, his debts, the ones we've stipulated, will now be, because in reality, I do bear some form of responsibility to make sure that he does his duties anyway. But it's not it's not something we can impose on I can't go to Chaim Yankel and say, hey, Shmerel owes me money. You're a fellow Jew. If he owes me... That's true. As a fellow Jew, you should try and convince him to pay his debts if he can. It's a mitzvah to pay your debts. But this gives us the background why somebody else can take upon himself to open up, so to speak, to be that person who will be responsible for the other, because they are not two separate entities anyway. Really, they're all part of one collective. And within that collective, one person takes guarantorship for the other one. This is something that can be done. In other words, in the Yehuda Binyamin scenario, where he takes responsibility to bring the boy back, he says, I'm in his place. Basically, I and him are one. And this also can now also, and that's why we learn the concept of being a guarantor financially from this dramatic episode with Yehuda and Binyamin, because what Yehuda was doing is revealing to us really that his connection with Binyamin is beyond just having taken responsibility. Avdecha alav et anar means that I'm connected to him in the deepest of ways. And as we explained, it really goes beyond just a commitment of something that is just arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. It's that commitment becomes a real commitment because it represents something that deep down is the reality. So we have interesting. Alav means to guarantee. There's another thing. Alev means also sweet. And Alev also means mixed up. So if you look at it, you see the Jewish people are considered to be mixed up with each other, part of one collective, which makes them being able to guarantee one each other, and that's very, very sweet. When you know that you're not on your own, you know you're part of a collective, you know you're part of one people, that each of them is equally important in the total build-up of the body, the total scenario, the total, so to speak, the menorah of the Jewish people, or the one body, so to speak, of the Jewish collective, of the Jewish people, that's something that's very sweet. It means we're never alone. It means we always have others that we need to look out for, and that will look out for us. So that's a very beautiful thought, and the reason we learn this from Yehuda, and why did Yehuda personify this more than anybody else? Because Yehuda, remember who Yehuda is. Next week, Yaakov blesses Yehuda to say that Yehuda is like a lion. A lion is, of course, the king of the animals, the king of the beasts. And he says he crouched, he rested like a lion, and like a lion, who will rouse him? What does that mean? That's talking about Mashiach. Talking about King David, who will come from Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. And the Davidic lineage following through King Solomon becomes the lineage of kings that will always be kings amongst the Jewish people. Today we don't have that, but when our kingship, when our malchus, when our kingdom will be reenacted, the king Mashiach will be from the Davidic house. In other words, from the house of Yehuda. A king, we know what we know about a king. A king, we know that the king is like the community, it says, because the community and all of Israel are dependent on him. And we see this in a very open verse in Bamidbar chapter 21, verse 21, where Hashem speaks about, it says that Moshe sent messengers, but then on the other verse it says, for the same, depicting the same episode, that the Jewish people sent messengers. And Rashi comments there that Moses is Israel and Israel is Moses. Moshe and Israel are synonymous. To teach you that the leader, the Nasi of the generation, is equal to the entire generation, because the leader is everything. In other words, what represents the collective of the Jewish people, that's the leader. The leader is like the heart and mind of the people. Really, we know that in every generation there's a collective soul of which all the other souls are made up of and derive their energy, their physical, spiritual energy from, and that's the tzaddik. And so therefore Yehuda being the one that represents kingship, he's the one that represents the oneness and the mixed upness, so to speak, in a good way. Now, we say mixed up, sometimes we say, oh, the guy's mixed up from it. No, the oneness and the fact that all of them are integrated and totally blended one with each other, this is taught to us by Yehuda. So this, of course, needs to tell us, and does tell us, something very, very fundamental about who we are as Jews, and about the obligations, the responsibilities, and the merit, the opportunity, the privilege we have. You know, there's an interesting story. There's a joke they say that there was a guy who was driving down the highway, the 17, the thruway in New York, going up to the Catskills, and he sees a guy at the side of the road with a yarmulke. His car is broken down, so he goes over to him to said, he stops the car. He says, "You need any help?" The guy says, "Yeah, I need a jack. My jack broke." Okay. He helps him jack up the car, change his tire. He says, "Where are you from?" And they start playing the Jewish geography. From here, from there. He says, "No, I'm not Jewish." He says, "No, that's him." He says, "What's the yarmulke about?" He says, "My father told me if I ever get trouble in the car or something, I should keep in my dashboard a yarmulke. And I stop the car, pull it over, put on the yarmulke, and then you'll see there's gonna be help." So his jack, he didn't have his jack, but he had a yarmulke. That's the kind of responsibility we need to feel for each other. Now, generally, of course, mankind should feel that kind of responsibility for each other as well. But here we're talking about within the family. There's the collective humanity, and then within humanity there's various nations. We're talking here about the people of Israel, about Jews with each other, that they are considered like one entity, like one body. And therefore, there needs to be a deep feeling of responsibility one for each other. And this is, of course, not just in a physical way, but in a spiritual way. So you may have met up with a Chabadnik, with a Lubavitcher, and they'll ask you, have you put on tefillin? Would you like to put on tefillin? And you look at him, leave me alone, what's the matter with you? What do you care? Did you put on tefillin? And the answer is that you putting on tefillin or lighting Shabbat candles or lighting the menorah, a mitzvah that you do or don't do is not just a private. It's not just a private issue between you and God. We're all part of one collective. It's like you're drilling a hole in your boat. You say, don't pay no attention. It's my seat. I paid for my seat. Hello. If you're doing a disservice to yourself, if you're doing something unhealthy to yourself, it's also my business. And within the Jewish community, if another Jew is not utilizing fully the opportunities they have to do their own mitzvahs, it's not my tefillin or my Hanukkah lights or my thing that I'm trying to sell to you. It's yours. It just may be that I was given the good fortune of being raised, knowing about it, being raised, practicing it. It's easier for me. And more than that, I have the good fortune to be a student of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And although physically he has passed, but spiritually he continues to live and to lead. And the way he continues to live is by us, all of those who know about him, all of his students, all of his shluchim, all of his chassidim, continuing to do that which he taught us, continuing to care, show that same kind of care that he showed to Jews of all walks of life from all places, notwithstanding any differences that notwithstanding any external differences, and that is the path of life we need to embark on to keep that mission alive. And by keeping that mission alive, by keeping those teachings alive, by keeping his directives alive, very much like it says by Yaakov, even after he physically passed, it says he continued to live. As the Gemara says, the Gemara tells us, Mazal o b'chayim, afu b'chayim. His children are alive, and if his children are alive, he is alive. And so the Rebbe continues to live through us, through those who continue in his path. And you don't have to have a beard, you don't have to wear a yarmulke, you don't have to consider yourself religious to continue in the Rebbe's path. There's actually a wonderful book called Rebbe. It's written by Joseph Talushkin. And this book will share with you the Rebbe's wisdom and the things you can learn from the Rebbe's life. Rebbe's, that's something, a book I recommend to you. So if you want to buy yourself a Hanukkah gift, Google it. You'll find it's called Rebbe by Joseph Talushkin. And let us all continue in his path. Let us all continue to care for each other physically, to care for each other spiritually, and may we merit that Mashiach comes, takes us all to light the menorah in the third Beis HaMikdash speedily in our days. Thank you very much. A happy Hanukkah. Turn off the live thing also. Yes, yes. What is going on?